So I think honestly speaking, in that I almost talked myself out of racing like as the weeks led up. So training for Ironman 70.3 at the end of August, Maine, going back for a little redemption. So I went in excited and almost relieved that it was going to be over soon, right? Because I think the build-up itself was what was the hardest part. Whereas race day, I know that once the gun goes off, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to finish the race. The morning of the race, it was high tide, the water was freezing, there was massive waves. The water apparently had never been that intense in like a decade in Maine, so I just kind of started laughing to myself like figures, because I can't swim. So there was that. They do a great job at the event of organizing and pumping you up, so I was ready to go. As soon as the gun went off, it was time to go compete, and I tried to do exactly that. The swim was rough. I certainly felt like I wasn't moving really at all. The tide was against us, the current was against us rather. But eventually, like, you make a turn, right, and you can kind of see the buoys start to pass, and I certainly was making progress, and I found my rhythm, I would say, the second half of that swim. Swam a hell of a lot slower than the year before, right, because eventually I saw my watch when I got out of the water. And that was kind of like a gut punch, because in my training leading up, I had been really dramatically improved in the pool, but swimming in open water is a different beast. And so unfortunately on the day, that training didn't come to fruition. But I got out of the water and I kind of just shook it off and said, okay, well, at least that's over. Sprinted over to my bike, hopped on, and was moving at the beginning of the bike, like felt fantastic. I'd say 20 miles into the bike out of 56, I was hurting, and I was like, holy shit, like you have literally not even gotten to the halfway point. In that moment, I tried to use one of my personal racing tactics, which is really kind of just call on certain memories and certain like driving factors into why I train and why I do what I do. So I tried thinking about Jake and thinking about, I was like, who are you to quit? Those types of thoughts were ones that came into my head. And unfortunately, for the first time that it's really ever since kind of using that, it just put me in a really like dark place, quite frankly. And I was like alone on the bike, feeling like trash, into a headwind, and just with some pretty nasty thoughts rolling around in my head, which is tough, right? You want to feel empowered, you want to feel fit and strong and positive while you're in these events, and I was in like a literal low point, and just suffering. And so by the time I got off the bike, I felt super dehydrated, malnourished, etc. And there was a point in time where I was finishing that bike ride, coming in, and I thought to myself, like, I'm not running. Like, I'm not gonna put on my shoes, I'm just gonna tap out. And somehow, some way, I put the shoes on and I found myself like jogging out. I guess I had convinced myself otherwise. And once I started running, there was no turning back. Found my stride pretty quickly on the run. Again, that's my strength, and so I'm always gonna feel fast in comparison to most people. So I was passing people, and eventually what I thought was just bike legs, tightness in my legs, was absolutely not that. And I started to get really severe quad cramps each mile. So I've never walked in a race in my entire life, and I had to walk, like come to a screeching halt, because it felt like someone was tearing my quads off my legs. And so every mile I would come to the mile marker, I'd fight to that point, and I would have to walk for at least a minute, maybe a little bit more. That was frustrating. Ended up with a 1:44 half marathon, which is the slowest half marathon I've ever run in my entire life. With about a half mile to go, I was able to sprint it in and kind of just push through any physical limitations or pain that I had in my legs, because quite frankly, I wasn't really that tired, I just couldn't move. So overall this year, I finished in a 5:22, I believe it was. The year prior, I did it in 4:51. So I was about 30 minutes slower than my first ever half Ironman. In my second, I walked away more unhappy with the prep that I did than the race itself, because quite frankly, I fought very, very hard on the day. I gave it what I had, but I was tough for about hours and 22 minutes, and I was not tough the 5 months leading up. Always, right? Training for me has been a stress reliever, right? Rather than an added stress. And unfortunately, because of the goals and the standards that I set for myself, sometimes it's just not feasible to go into a race with that all-in mentality and expect that of yourself when you literally can't fit in the training that you need to do to get to that level. My goal, my objective of this fall is to really focus on these businesses and build them to what I know they can be, because at the end of the day, building these is gonna help a hell of a lot more people than me running a sub-5 Ironman, right? So I think when you paint the picture of how many people it can help, that's what will continue to drive me day in, day out to work as hard as I've worked at those things in this, right? And not all of it at once, half-ass, right? I'd rather do something really special with this than kind of be okay at a lot of things. So that's the goal, and I think that's what I want to start to capture this fall, but this will be the focus, and I think this will be the story that we tell moving forward.